The sun was setting over a deserted road in the Mexican countryside. The wind cut through the mountains, bringing a heavy, hot air. A passenger bus, bound for a distant city, traveled peacefully along the road. Inside, a group of civilians chatted, and some dozed in the sweaty seats. But what no one knew was that disguised as civilians were 20 elite soldiers on a secret mission. They were infiltrated on the bus, observing the movements of members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, which dominated the region. The CJNG, known for its brutality and reach, was on high alert. Rumors of a spy infiltrated within the organization had surfaced, and the cartel would not hesitate to stop any vehicle that appeared suspicious. It was not uncommon for them to randomly check any shipment, especially if the cargo was strategic. As the bus moved forward, the tension in the seats was palpable. The soldiers, accustomed to risky situations, remained calm, but their eyes were always alert to their surroundings, ready to react to any unexpected movement. The driver, seemingly calm, ignored the murmurs of the passengers, while the bus continued on its way with the assurance that it was immune to any confrontation. However, a bend ahead would change everything. The bus began to slow down as, ahead, an improvised roadblock had been set up by several armed men. The weapons gleamed in the setting sun. Without warning, the vehicle was forced to stop, and the CJNG men surrounded the bus. They didn't know it, but that would be the last time their actions would go unpunished. The sound of the bus doors opening echoed across the silent road. The CJNG men, armed to the teeth, began to surround the vehicle. Their faces were covered, but their heavy footsteps were enough to demonstrate their dominance over the situation. The group's leader, a tall man with a scar across the left side of his face, stepped forward, signaling for the driver and passengers to get off. The leader, known as the Shadow, he was on a frantic search. He had information that there were traitors within the organization, and any sign of espionage would be dealt with extremely severely. His eyes fixed on the passengers, who, although nervous, did not show any exaggerated reaction. He looked suspiciously at each of them, quickly assessing them, but without realizing that the military were among that group. Among the passengers, one ordinary-looking man stood out. Jose was one of the undercover soldiers, with the calm expression of someone who knew he was in control, but with his senses fully alert. He was 32 years old and had a career marked by high-risk missions. He was the type of soldier who rarely spoke, but always observed attentively. He prepared for any move, any mistake the cartels might make. Beside him, other soldiers maintained a similar posture, absorbing the details of the situation with almost military precision. In the back seat, Laura, a 25-year-old woman, remained quiet, trying not to draw attention. She had been assigned to help infiltrate the CJNG, using the appearance of an ordinary civilian to avoid raising suspicion. She had a complicated past, a history marked by family tragedies related to organized crime, and this job was a way to seek revenge against those who had destroyed her life. Although her role was that of Jose's friend, her heart raced as she watched the cartel members descend with their weapons. The CJNG men began to storm the bus, ordering everyone to kneel. The atmosphere was tense, but Jose knew this was the moment to act. What the cartel men didn't realize was that this seemingly simple verification mission would be the trigger for a much more dangerous situation. Jose exchanged a quick glance with the other soldiers, signaling that they were ready. But nothing could have prepared either side for what would happen next. El Sombra looked directly at Jose. His suspicious gaze and curt words indicated that he had noticed something out of the ordinary. Jose couldn't afford to be discovered, so, with a subtle gesture, he signaled for the others to prepare themselves. What he didn't know was that his outward calm and trained soldier's posture would be the elements that would save everyone in a moment of imminent chaos. The CJNG was about to make a fatal move, unaware that they were about to face a group of highly trained soldiers. The leader of CJNG, the Shadow, He walked down the aisles of the bus, his implacable expression betraying distrust. He knew something was wrong, and the eyes he fixed on José were like sharp blades, cutting through every movement, every gesture. He approached José, who remained silent, hands on his knees, and gave a small, sarcastic smile. "Are you nervous, friend?" "The shadow," he asked, his voice thick with cynicism. José didn't answer immediately. Every word from the cartel leader had a palpable tension, as if the air around them had become thicker. He knew that any wrong reaction could be the end for everyone. José remained calm. He knew the mission demanded precision, with no room for error. "No, I'm just tired," he said, trying to sound like a simple passenger, but inside, the pressure mounted with each passing second. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles caught their attention. They were more CJNG men, probably part of the cartel's patrol. Chaos was beginning to form around the bus, and José knew there was no more time to act discreetly. He exchanged a quick glance with Laura, who, seated further back, was prepared for the next move. She would once again make the call to headquarters, while the others prepared for an inevitable confrontation. The shadow. He gestured for the other cartel members to come closer. They were about to conduct a thorough search of each passenger, convinced they had found something important. But José knew the cartel's tactic was pure intimidation. The search would be a simple power play, nothing more. So, the first move was made. When one of the cartel members approached José and touched his pocket, José quickly grabbed the man's arm, making a precise movement that knocked him to the ground. The sound of the impact was muffled by the noise of the cartel's cars parking nearby. Instantly, the bus transformed into an improvised battlefield. The other soldiers, in disguise, jumped into action. José, now standing, ran towards the cartel leader, disarming another man who approached him. The confrontation was quick, but the soldiers' precision was overwhelming. Within minutes, the CJNG members, caught off guard, began to lose ground. Chaos gripped the road. The cartel's vehicles' sirens blared, but it was too late. The army's elite teams were now in full control, and the confrontation had spilled out of the bus. The operation was underway, and the CJNG no longer had the upper hand. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected place. When the shadow, realizing the situation had spiraled out of control, he looked at José with a glint of recognition. He knew the man before him wasn't just a passerby. José had been an infiltrator from the start. The cartel leader smiled, not out of anger, but with a mixture of respect and distrust. "You're more than just a soldier's look, aren't you?" the shadowy said, in a voice that echoed through the tumult. José, now with his weapon pointed at the leader, simply watched him. He knew that this moment would be decisive. The tension was palpable, and the mission was not yet complete, but the confrontation had intensified. Meanwhile, Laura, the young soldier, had a crucial role to play. She was in control of communications, trying to coordinate the supporting forces and ensure the cartels didn't have time to react. Her heart raced, but she knew she couldn't fail. Everyone's fate depended on the accuracy of her actions. In a moment of distraction, José made a quick move and, with the help of the other soldiers, managed to disarm the shadow, knocking him to the ground. The cartel leader looked at him, his eyes filled with fury, but also with admiration. "You got me," he murmured, defeated, but with a wry smile. "But the game isn't over yet." The chaos unfolding outside the bus was only the beginning. The situation was far from resolved, and while the military took immediate control, there was more to unfold in the shadows of the operation. On the opposite side of the road, the support unit, composed of more disguised soldiers, watched intently. They knew that even though they had neutralized the initial threat, there were still imminent risks. The cartel did not operate in isolation. Its tentacles extended throughout the region, and this ambush was only one part of a much larger network. Laura, though she appeared calm, felt increasing pressure. She was responsible for coordinating communication between the field team and Central Command. She knew that any mistake could compromise the mission, but she was determined to make everything work out. When she realized that the CJNG leader had been captured, she quickly activated the support unit, ordering them to send reinforcements to apprehend all remaining cartel members in the area. Meanwhile, Joseph faced a silent dilemma. The capture of the Shadow-It seemed to be a sure-fire hit against the cartel, but he couldn't ignore the coded messages that were beginning to emerge in Laura's communications. Something was wrong. The operation didn't seem to be what he imagined. Their infiltration of the CJNG was part of a more complex operation, but there was something bigger at stake. Jose knew he couldn't completely trust appearances. The Shadow Jose, the cartel leader, knew far more than he let on. There was growing tension among the cartel members, a hierarchy that was crumbling as the pressure mounted. Jose was unsure whether the original mission was truly to dismantle the cartel or if there was another, darker, more personal objective behind it. As he was thinking about this, the radio in his jacket crackled. Laura's voice interrupted him. "Jose, you have to listen to this. The commander is requesting a change of plan. We need to extract El Sombra before he can call for reinforcements. They have a parallel operation underway, and we don't yet know who's involved." Jose hesitated for a moment. The fact that Laura was so direct, leaving no room for explanations, indicated that the situation was more serious than he had imagined. The pressure to discover the true nature of the mission was now becoming an obsession. At the same time, the external situation was no longer under control. The cartel had mobilized its reserves, and the first signs of reinforcements were arriving. Several vans began appearing around bends in the road, each with armed men ready to rescue them. The Shadow. The tension inside the bus was almost palpable. The remaining soldiers were preparing for evacuation, but something made them hesitate. Their initial confidence was fading as they realized things weren't as simple as they seemed. Each knew their role in the operation was crucial, but the growing sense of uncertainty was beginning to erode the trust they had placed in their superiors. Jose, aware that cartel reinforcements were approaching, decided it was time to act independently. He approached Laura and with a serious look said, "We're going to need more than just force. The CJNG won't let us leave here so easily. I need you to give me all the information about the parallel operation. I want to know what's really going on." Laura agreed quickly, but before she could respond, the earth shook with the sound of a roaring engine. It was another cartel van. They were surrounding the place. The original plan for a quick capture was crumbling before her eyes. What Jose didn't know was that behind this mission, there was something much more complex. He was beginning to realize that he himself was being manipulated. The operation against the CJNG wasn't just an infiltration mission. There was a power game happening in the shadows, and he still didn't know who was really in control. About that, the Shadow still captured. He grinned crookedly. He knew the game was far from over. There was much more to it than anyone imagined. The sun had already completely disappeared, and night began to engulf the deserted road. The sound of the cartel's vans approaching mingled with the tense murmurs of the soldiers and the faint hiss of communications. What had previously seemed like a controlled operation was now at risk of turning into a full-blown massacre. Jose, a few meters from the Shadow, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Capturing the CJNG leader was a victory, but everything around him was about to turn into a nightmare. The evacuation plan was underway, but Laura's new information and the growing pressure on the ground indicated that something bigger was coming, something he hadn't foreseen. At any moment the vans would approach, bringing with them more cartel soldiers. They were determined to rescue them. The Shadow and time to escape was running out. Jose needed to make a quick decision, but at the same time, he knew that this would mean abandoning the original capture plan. There was an unknown factor, something Laura had briefly mentioned in her last communications, the parallel operation. The shadow seeing Jose's nervousness, he let out a satisfied smile. "You don't understand, do you?" he said in an almost whispering voice. "You think you're in control, but you're playing on my team." Jose frowned. What did he mean by that? He looked at Laura, who was hurrying closer. Her eyes were serious, and she seemed to be carrying important news. As she got closer, she handed him a small device, and he quickly attached it to his jacket. The message was short, but clear. "The commander is under arrest. There is no more support coming. The operation is yours now. Decide how you will proceed." The shock was immediate. Jose, who until that moment believed the mission was still under control, now realized that the whole plot was further away than he had imagined. The commander, who was supposedly responsible for guiding the operation, had been captured, or, even worse, was dead. They were now on a mission without leadership, without external support. It was a hunt for their own command. With this new information, the situation changed drastically. The military was without direct orders, and the risk of being massacred by the cartels was becoming increasingly greater. Jose knew that if he didn't make a quick decision, all the work they had done up to that point could be wasted. He looked at the shadow, who somehow seemed satisfied with how things were going. "I think you finally understood," he said, the shadow, with an almost triumphant tone. "We're not just playing for control of the territory. We're playing to see who gets out of here alive." Jose turned to Laura, who, although visibly tense, still maintained a firm posture. She knew he was in charge now. He needed to act quickly. There was no more room for hesitation. "Prepare everyone to evacuate," ordered Jose. "But we can't leave. The shadow, he can escape. He knows more than he's letting on. We need the truth now." The tension was palpable. The approaching support unit was composed of more cartel members, and the only chance of escape now was through direct confrontation. Jose felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins, and although he was in a leadership position, he didn't know what the next move would be. The mission had become a true fight for survival. Meanwhile, the cartel's reinforcements arrived and began to surround the location. In a fraction of a second, the decision was made. Jose knew he wouldn't have another chance. He activated the communication device and sent a final message to headquarters. Mission changed. Capture El Sombra or total evacuation. There is no other choice. The turning point had arrived. The operation was no longer about arresting a cartel leader. It was about surviving, unmasking the traitors, and perhaps understanding the game that was being played behind it all. But one thing was certain. The future of everyone there depended on Jose's next decisions. The CJNG would no longer be the main enemy. Now, the real enemy was the mission itself, which was about to be completely exposed. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance, cutting through the tension that gripped the deserted road. Jose, now in complete control of the situation, found himself forced to act quickly. The message he had sent to headquarters signaled a radical change in the course of the mission. It was no longer a simple matter of retrieving information or arresting someone. The shadow now, survival was the priority. The operation had spiraled out of control. As CJNG vans surrounded the bus, the remaining soldiers began to organize into defensive positions. Cartel reinforcements arrived in large numbers, bringing with them a nightmare of possibilities. They were prepared for anything, to fight to the death, to rescue their leader, and if necessary, to exterminate anyone who stood in their way. But Jose knew that the only chance to save their lives and accomplish the mission was to understand that they were in enemy territory, and that there was no longer a clear plan. The military was acting with visible force, but the reality was that they were outnumbered, without direct communication with headquarters, and without support from other commands. Laura, once again, was the voice of reason, although the fear in her eyes was undeniable. "Jose, we need more time. If he escapes now, he'll alert the entire cartel, and then the mission will completely fail. Jose shook his head. We can't let him get away. He knows too much. He knows that our mission isn't what it seems. His gaze remained fixed on the shadow, who until that moment had remained surprisingly calm in the face of the chaos around him. He knew he was being watched, but the cartel leader also knew how to play with other people's minds. Do you think you're going to get out of here alive? The shadow, he said with a cynical smile. Your mission has already been compromised. Death is the fate of anyone who tries to mess with me. His words were confident, almost disdainful, but there was something in his attitude that still indicated the weight of the situation. He knew that if he were captured, the truth about the mission would leak out, and that would change everything. The cartel's reinforcements began to move more aggressively. Jose knew that at any moment the fight could escalate even further. What had previously seemed like a simple infiltration operation had turned into a battle for survival. There was no more room for error. The sound of gunfire reverberated around the bus, and the first cartel members fell. But despite the military resistance, the cartel's advance seemed unstoppable. With each passing second, more CJNG members arrived, completely surrounding the area. Laura ran to join Jose, her expression worried. Jose, we need to evacuate now. If we stay here, we'll all be killed. The commander is no longer in charge, but we can still accomplish the objective of neutralizing the cartel if we're quick. Jose hesitated. He knew the evacuation plan was the best option, but something prevented him from simply leaving the place. The shadow. He was there, and time was running out to gather vital information. Jose couldn't leave without first understanding what was really happening. He looked at Laura, and their eyes met for a brief moment of mutual understanding. They were in this together until the end. As the confrontation intensified, Jose made the decision. Let's evacuate, but the shadow, he can't get out alive. If he learns too much about our mission, we'll all be hunted down. The decision was made with agonizing speed. A direct confrontation with the cartel was no longer viable. Jose knew that the CJNG leader needed to be neutralized, but now he understood that the mission wasn't just about capturing the cartel. It was about keeping the truth safe, about ensuring that the operation's intentions weren't revealed. The evacuation plan was initiated with the utmost care, but as the cartel's forces increased, time became increasingly scarce. Jose felt the weight of the decisions being made. Each choice now could mean life or death for him and his companions. Even though the situation was becoming increasingly chaotic, a sense of relief began to take hold of Jose. Not because of the situation itself, but because of the certainty that while the shadow, if it were under his control, he would have time to turn the tables. There was something more behind the cartel, something that not even the shadow he knew. But Joseph was only beginning to understand it gradually. The tension on the road increased with each passing minute. The sound of approaching cars and the constant crackle of gunfire made the atmosphere unbearable. Jose, though still in a leadership position, felt the weight of every decision, every move he would make next. He knew the mission was far from over and that everyone's future was in his hands. But something inside him had changed. Something he never imagined he would have to face, the fine line between being an obedient soldier and being a leader capable of making unpopular decisions. He no longer possessed his former tranquility, the calmness that had so characterized him. Every movement seemed fraught with risk. Every word of the shadow it made him question whether he really knew what was going on, or if he was just another pawn in this dangerous power game. Laura, standing beside him, maintained a firm posture, but her eyes showed how much she too was being tested. They were both on a path of no return. Their mission was no longer a matter of capturing criminals. Now it was a matter of survival and maintaining the integrity of the information they possessed. But more than that, it was about what would happen when the truth about the operation was finally revealed. Jose began to realize that his experience as a soldier hadn't prepared him for something like this. He had faced enemies in war, but never in this way, with the rules of the game constantly changing. The uncertainties about the true nature of the mission were consuming him, and now more than ever he needed to understand what the next step would be. "Jose," Laura said, interrupting his thoughts, "we need to decide now. We can't wait any longer." Jose looked at her, noticing for the first time how close she was to collapse. She had been strong, steadfast all along, but now the pressure was becoming unbearable for her too. It was the first time he had seen so much fear in Laura's eyes, and it stirred something within him. He couldn't be the leader she needed and still remain on the sidelines of crucial decisions. He had to stand up, not just as a soldier, but as someone capable of guiding his comrades through this situation. The situation on the ground was becoming increasingly difficult. The cartel was pressing harder and harder, and the evacuation plan was becoming more dangerous by the minute. There was no more time to hesitate. Jose took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but also a new sense of clarity. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting to understand the true mission. What he did next would define not only his life, but the lives of his comrades. "Laura, I'll lead the evacuation, but first we need to make sure that—" "The Shadow. Don't leave here alive. Let's do this now, and then we can escape. There are no other alternatives." Laura looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and sadness. She knew he was determined, and that gave her strength. They were a team, and Jose had finally accepted that his true strength came from his choices and actions, not just his ability to follow orders. The evacuation had begun, but contrary to what Jose had imagined, he wasn't just escaping the cartel's encirclement. He was finally becoming the leader his team needed. He was beginning to take the reins of everyone's destiny, not with fear or indecision, but with the confidence that his actions could now define the future of the operation. The leader of CJNG, the Shadow, he was still imprisoned, but what he knew and what he was about to reveal could change everything. The truth, Jose now understood, wasn't just in the documents or the information he had gathered. The real truth lay in the choices he would make next. He would have to face not only external enemies, but also the weight of the internal consequences of his mission. There was no turning back. As the evacuation operation continued, Jose began to feel a shift within himself. The pressure, the fear, the doubt, all of it had brought him to a turning point. He was ready to become more than just a soldier. He was ready to be the leader everyone needed. With the evacuation underway and the tension mounting with each passing second, Jose looked at the faces of his team. He knew that in the end, they would be the ones to decide whether they would emerge victorious or succumb to the chaos. "Let's get out of here," he said in a firm voice, "and let's make sure what happened here doesn't go unanswered." Now, he was no longer just a soldier. He was a leader. And ultimately, that was the true test of his journey. Night was drawing to a close. The distant sound of sirens and the growing rumble of approaching cars indicated that the conflict was reaching its climax. Jose, though still leading the evacuation, felt the weight of the choices he had made up to that point. The mission was far from a simple rescue or capture. Now everything depended on how he would handle the final moments of this operation. The cartel's vans were surrounding the road, more and more reinforcements arriving every second. The net was closing in, and the pressure on Jose and his team was only mounting, but the evacuation couldn't stop. They were finally beginning to understand the true objective of this mission, to prevent the Shadow. He had to escape with any vital information. No matter the cost, he needed to be eliminated. Laura, still by Jose's side, was on high alert. She knew that even with the evacuation underway, the CJNG wouldn't let them escape easily. They were surrounded on all sides, and despite the efficiency of Jose's team, the cartel's forces were vast and well-trained. It was a race against time, and as the situation worsened, they couldn't lose control. "Jose," said Laura, interrupting his thoughts, "we need to act fast. We can't wait any longer. If he finds out what happened, he could ruin everything." Her voice was tense but determined. "It's now or never." Jose nodded. They had been through so many difficulties, so many challenges, that this last stage of the mission seemed like a final test. He knew that the only way to avoid a tragedy would be to neutralize the Shadow Wand, to ensure that information about the operation did not fall into the hands of the cartel. But at the same time, he knew that by doing so, he was putting everyone's lives at risk. "Let's deliver one last blow," said Jose, his voice firm and resolute. "The objective now is to eliminate the Shadow Wand, ensure that the CJNG doesn't have time to react." As he spoke, the tension rose. The remaining soldiers were positioned to cover the evacuation, but they knew that without the cartel leader, the fight would be meaningless. They needed to defeat him. The Shadow and his gang as quickly as possible before any reinforcements arrived. Just as Jose was preparing to give the final order, the radio in his jacket crackled. Laura's voice once again interrupted what seemed to be the last chance for a successful evacuation. "Jose, something is wrong. We're receiving new communications. They know about our operation. The cartel is preparing for a mass attack. We can't leave here without confronting them." Jose felt the adrenaline surge through him. Time was running out. He looked at Laura, who was clearly worried but also determined. They had to make one last move, a move that would define the future of the mission. "Prepare for the final showdown," Joseph ordered. "We can't let this get out of control now. They know too much. Now is the time to show them who's in charge." The tension was palpable. Jose knew that after that night, nothing would be the same. The operation had changed course more than once, but now was the time to act with everything they had. There was no more room for hesitation or doubt. The final confrontation was about to happen. The team was in position, ready to fight one last time. The atmosphere was tense, with the sound of the vans getting closer and closer. Time seemed to have stopped, and Jose knew that, within a few minutes, everyone's story would be rewritten. The fate of his mission depended on one thing: how he and his team would handle the final confrontation. As he prepared for what was to come, Jose felt a mixture of anger and determination. He could no longer look back. The moment to face his enemies head-on had arrived. The only thing he could control now was how he would handle the climax of the mission. The final confrontation was imminent. CJNG vans lined the road, their flashlights blazing intensely, like predatory eyes waiting for the right moment to strike. Jose, now completely immersed in the mission, knew that everything he had done up to that point would culminate in this moment. There was no more room for fear or indecision. The fate of his team and the success or failure of the operation depended on a single decision: neutralize the Shadow before he could alert the entire cartel. The sound of motorcycles and vehicles grew louder, filling the air with a growing sense of despair. Jose, breathless and with a racing heart, signaled to his team, positioning them strategically. They were in a dead end, and there was no more time to escape. Fighting was no longer a choice. It was the only way to survive. Laura, beside him, was more tense than ever. She knew what was at stake, and the pressure of dealing with all of this was beginning to show in her gestures. Her eyes were fixed on Jose, waiting for his final decision. "Jose," she said in a lower voice, almost a whisper, "we can't hesitate. They're coming too fast. If we let them, the Shadow to escape, all the effort will be in vain." Jose nodded, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes steady. He was no longer thinking of the mission as just another military operation. He knew that in confronting the CJNG, he was facing something much bigger, a machine of power and corruption. But now the objective was clear. He needed to maintain control. The sound of the approaching vans grew louder. Jose, with a hand signal, gave the order. In a synchronized movement, the team spread out, taking up their positions. They were ready for the final battle. The confrontation began abruptly. Shots rang out, and the sound of bullets tearing through the air echoed in the night. The soldiers' precision proved effective, but the cartel's reinforcements were immense, and every second became a desperate fight for survival. The blinding lights of the vans and the noise of the gunfire made the atmosphere electrically tense, as if the whole world were in a frantic game of chess where any wrong move could be fatal. Joseph, with the courage of a leader who knew he could not back down, advanced to the heart of the operation. He needed to put an end to it. The shadow, before the cartel had time to react, he saw him in the distance, trying to move towards the line of vehicles to escape, but Jose wouldn't give him that chance. In a swift movement, he ran to intercept him. The shadow, with his confident smile, he turned to face him, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. "You think you're going to stop me?" he taunted, before pulling out a pistol. Jose didn't hesitate. He used his experience and strength to disarm the cartel leader with surprising agility. The fight was brief, but intense. Both knew that this exchange of blows would decide more than just the physical battle. It was a fight for control, for power over what would happen next. While the gunshots continued in the background, Jose finally immobilized him, the shadow pushing him against the hood of one of the vans. He was there, finally, at the moment he had so feared, facing the man who had all the answers, the man who could put an end to this mission, but also to all the secrets that lay hidden in the shadows. The shadow. He looked at him, his gaze still tinged with sarcasm, but beneath it lay a palpable frustration. "You think you're going to win. What you don't understand, Jose, is that CJNG is a force that can't be defeated like that. Even if I fall, this isn't the end of it." Jose, breathing with difficulty, kept his gaze fixed on the cartel leader. He knew that the shadow, he wasn't just talking about CJNG, but something bigger, a network of corruption and violence that extended beyond Mexico's borders. But at that moment, Jose's only thought was the end of this operation, the truth behind it all. Without saying another word, Jose pulled out the handcuffs and arrested the shadow, finally neutralizing the threat. He knew this didn't mean final victory, but it was a decisive battle in the game they were involved in. The battle around them began to subside, the gunfire dwindling as the cartel's resistance weakened. Jose's team had done their part. The shadow, he was imprisoned, and for the time being the CJNG would lose one of its most powerful leaders. Jose looked at his team, exhausted but determined. The mission wasn't complete, but that moment, that confrontation, had been decisive. They had passed the trial by fire, and although the path to true victory was still uncertain, at that moment Jose felt he had overcome the greatest obstacle of all, himself. The sounds of combat gradually faded, and silence enveloped the road, a tense, almost surreal calm. The scene, once a battle arena, now resembled a field of silent reflection. Jose, his weariness etched on his face, looked at his team who, despite their wounds and exhaustion, were still standing. They had endured a true ordeal, but they were still together, survivors. The shadow, he was immobilized, arrested, and being escorted to a van that would take him back to the military base. Jose knew this didn't mean the end of the war, but rather a momentary victory. The cartel would continue to operate, and although he had captured one of its leaders, the war against organized crime in Mexico was much bigger than any of the operations he could conduct. But at that moment, Jose knew he had fulfilled his role, and that this meant some form of justice for those who had suffered for so long at the hands of the CJNG. Laura, who approached him, also seemed to be reflecting on what they had faced. She placed a hand on Jose's shoulder, as if sharing the emotional burden of the moment. They had won, but the scars of that mission would probably never disappear. "You made the right choice, Jose. We did what we could." Her voice was soft, but there was a quiet strength in her words. The mission had changed everyone's lives, but for Laura the truth was clear. The fight was far from over. They had dealt a significant blow to the CJNG, but corruption, power, and trafficking would continue to threaten their lives and the country. Joseph nodded, gazing at the horizon. The sky was already beginning to lighten with the first signs of dawn. I don't know if I made the right choice, but it was the only one I had. The rest of the team approached, and Jose looked at each of them. They were exhausted, covered in dirt and blood, but they all shared the same expression, a mixture of relief and sorrow. They knew that what they had faced was not something anyone could overcome without leaving scars. But at the same time, they also knew that they had made a difference. As the military vans began to pull away, carrying the shadow on their way to the detention center, Jose looked at his team again. The future was uncertain, but for now, they had accomplished their mission. They had survived. The road ahead seemed long, and the war against the cartel wouldn't end anytime soon. But in that instant, Jose felt a small sense of peace. The weight of responsibility hadn't lessened, but as much as he knew the battle would continue, he knew he could face what was to come. After all, he now knew that as a leader, the real fight was not only against external enemies, but against fear, doubt, and the very limitations he thought he possessed. Months have passed since that fateful night. The shadow, he was behind bars, but the investigations into the cartel and its ramifications were still ongoing. Jose and his team returned to their military routine, but the experience had marked them forever. The weight of the decisions made that night would never disappear. Although the CJNG had lost an important leader, the war against crime continued, more intense than ever. Jose knew that, in the end, the fight for justice would be a long and difficult road, but he was prepared. After all, as a leader, he had learned the true meaning of sacrifice. If you've made it this far, be sure to share your opinion about this journey with Jose and his team. What do you think about the role of courage and leadership in times of crisis? What would you do in a situation like this? Leave your comment below and share this story with your friends so that more people can be inspired in the fight for justice and truth. Keep following our narratives and subscribe for more stories of overcoming challenges, mystery, and action. The fate of each mission is in the hands of those who decide to act. And are you ready?